It was an ordinary evening in our residence, a scenario to which I had been accustomed over the years. The clock on the wall chimed audibly. As time progressed, seemingly both relentless and excruciatingly slow, I remained seated at the kitchen table under the subdued illumination. The overhead lamp created shadows over the room, while my husband was in the living room, absorbed in his computer. The screen's illumination illuminated his face, a sight that had become accustomed to him. Engrossed in his tasks, while I sat in quiet feigning engagement with reading or preoccupying myself with trivial activities, everything was excessively comfortable. There was an absence of chaos and emotional turmoil, yet that was precisely the issue. The issue was that the stillness between us had transformed into a burdensome weight. The intimacy we previously experienced had diminished, resulting in a void that neither of us appeared capable of reconciling. I could not recall the last instance he had genuinely regarded me as he once did. Upon our initial encounter, his glance, once ablaze with passion, provided me with all I required. Still, nothing seemed authentic. I was no longer unhappy, at least not in the manner I envisioned someone would be in a troubled marriage. There was no shouting or conflict. A pervasive sensation of immobility gnawed at me. I yearned for something more, something that would rouse me from the monotony. I yearned to feel invigorated, to encounter something that would rouse me from this haze. That was when he entered. My stepson, who had not intended to be present, arrived after a lengthy day seeking accommodation for the night. I had not seen him in weeks, yet there he stood in the doorway, appearing somewhat more mature than I recalled. "May I stay here temporarily?" His voice was casual, however I could not overlook the latent strain in his tone. He did not. I do not wish to be a burden, yet his presence seemed to convey an unsaid invitation, a portal to a realm I had not yet encountered. I was prepared to enter. I nodded initially without contemplating it deeply, as he was family. However, as he proceeded by me, I observed a small alteration in the atmosphere as the room appeared to transform, prompting my thoughts to accelerate. Conflicting ideas arose. Was it merely my perception, or had he indeed changed? There was an indefinable quality in his stare that eluded my understanding, placed something sharp that heightened my awareness of his presence in a manner hitherto unexperienced. I attempted to concentrate on another matter, however, I was preoccupied with the manner in which his gaze rested on me as though seeking something. There was something I was uncertain about relinquishing as he took a seat at the table opposite me, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The stillness between us was distinct this time. It lacked the comfort of years spent together, was laden with unarticulated words, imbued with the tension of potential possibilities. He finally broke the silence by asking, his voice low yet resonant. There was a particular heaviness about it, a depth I had not previously encountered. I hesitated, then shrugged. "It is acceptable, merely the customary circumstances." I preferred not to elaborate on the specifics. There is no merit in feigning perfection, yet I found myself unable to articulate the true source of my distress. I did not wish to appear ungrateful for the life I possessed, yet I desired more. He observed me intently. For a brief period his eyes narrowed slightly, as if attempting to discern my thoughts. There was an intriguing quality to his gaze. Not as a stepson gazes at his stepmother, but with an essence that is both familiar and foreign, that caused my heart to quicken slightly. "You appear different," he remarked, his voice nearly inaudible. It was not a compliment. It was neither an attack nor a critique. Rather, it was an observation that rendered me both acknowledged and exposed simultaneously. I was uncertain how to react, so I merely chuckled, albeit it manifested more as a tense exhalation than anything else. "I suppose I am simply fatigued." I waved my hand dismissively. Internally, I was far from fatigued. I was alert, acutely conscious of each moment that transpired between us, and the atmosphere felt electrified, as if something was precariously poised on the verge of transitioning into an uncertain realm for which I felt unprepared. The evening prolonged, yet I could not evade the allure of his gaze. He appeared to perceive it as well, evidenced by his lingering presence. Somewhat prolonged, his smile conveyed not merely courtesy, but an additional, elusive sentiment that I could not discern. His presence in the room was akin to a fissure in the tranquil facade of my existence, resonating deeply into my chest. This was not merely a casual visit or an ordinary evening. There was a transformation, a shift, and I was uncertain how to respond. Cease when he ultimately exited the room to prepare for bed. I remained there immobilized in the silence that had before felt initially pleasant. It suddenly felt like a constraint, its weight pressing heavily upon my shoulders, marking the first instance of such a sensation. For an extended while, I contemplated whether I had been anticipating an event to interrupt this routine, revitalize my spirit. I observed the clock. It was late, and I recognized the necessity of retiring for the night, yet the contemplation of reclining with my hubby in that same oppressive quiet suddenly became intolerable. I rose, my knees unsteady, and approached the bedroom. Just before I reached the door, I heard a gentle knock. However, suddenly my heart stopped a beat. It was not my spouse, but rather my stepson. Standing just outside, an unarticulated tension lingered between us. "Can we talk?" he inquired, his voice scarcely audible. A whisper signaled to me that the impending event would alter everything. The knock on the door hung in the atmosphere, palpable and inescapable. My hand remained on the doorknob, quivered imperceptibly as I gradually rotated it. The silence of the house had grown nearly oppressive with each sound. The silence between us intensified as I opened the door. I was uncertain of what to expect. However, the last thing I anticipated occurred. His fragility was so palpable and unprotected that he appeared to stand taller than before. I recalled with a slight stiffness in his demeanor that he was no longer a boy, a realization I had begun to perceive the instant he. Upon entering the residence, he exhibited a distinct change that had not previously existed. His physical growth was clear, but it was also the manner in which he conducted himself, self-assured and poised. That caused my heart to flutter against my rib cage. I reflexively stepped back, granting him space to enter his presence. The room was instantly filled, rendering everything smaller and more intimate. Nonetheless, the space between us had altered. I had not yet admitted it to myself. I convinced myself that I was merely dreaming things. Nothing had changed yet. The atmosphere felt altered, laden with tension, unexpressed desires, and an unpleasant quality. Foreboding awareness of an impending event, one for which I felt unprepared, accompanied his silent entrance into the room. His footsteps were nearly inaudible, as if he sought to avoid disrupting the delicate silence that enveloped us. He refrained from taking a seat. He stood there, momentarily observing me with an intense gaze, and for a brief instant I contemplated whether he could perceive my inner distress if he sensed it. He resembled his father significantly. There was an indefinable something about him that distinguished him, something I could not fully identify. It seemed excessively intimate for the relationship we had enjoyed. "Are you all right?" he inquired, his voice subdued and cautious. With a hint of apprehension that caused my pulse to accelerate, he did not resemble a stepson anxious about his stepmother. The tone resembled that of a man contemplating whether I required assistance beyond the customary offerings. I acknowledged the greetings with a nod, despite the response not being entirely accurate. "I am fine," I stated. Almost mechanically, my gaze could not sustain contact with his for more than a fleeting moment. I was compelled to avert my eyes, apprehensive of his reaction. May perceive the veracity in them, apprehensive that I may lack the ability to deceive persuasively. He appeared to falter, as if uncertain about how to position his hands. After lowering them to his sides, he now fidgeted with his sleeve. I observed the faint movement of his fingers on his shirt, but I swiftly averted my look, rebuking myself internally for permitting it to dwell on trivial matters. However, the moment had elapsed, and the quiet between us extended once again, both of us ensnared in the same unarticulated sentiment. He remarked in a subdued tone, akin to a confession, that he had observed a change in your demeanor recently. He was allowing me the opportunity to react and answer. There was an aspect in his tone that was neither accusatory nor intrusive, merely articulating a fact that had been escalating between us for days, weeks, or even longer. I refrained from responding. Instantly uncertain about how to proceed in this dialogue, his remarks pierced through the dense veil of apathy I possessed. Meticulously constructed around myself, it was not that I was unwilling to respond, rather I was unprepared to confront the truth, even when it was directly before me, was obscured by my fatigue. I uttered the lie effortlessly. The words escaped my lips, although they bore a bitter taste. Tired was a too simplistic explanation. For what had been occurring within me, what had been agitating in my chest for weeks, for months, was a want, a yearning. For whatever I could not entirely grasp, he nodded slowly, although his stare remained fixed on me, as if he were anticipating my disclosure, as if he could perceive the barriers I had constructed around myself, and for an instant I desired to dismantle them to allow him entry, yet the apprehension of potential consequences restrained me. "You are not fatigued," he remarked almost. He spoke to himself, but audibly enough for me to overhear, as his eyes scanned for something else. My expression conveyed a search for a sign, an indication that I would concede to what he already thought. I swallowed with difficulty, my lips parched. I found myself gasping for air beneath the intensity of his gaze. What was it about him and this moment that caused this reaction? Everything feels markedly different. It seems as though something beyond my control is eluding me. His comments lingered in the air between us, laden with significance. I was uncertain of the direction this talk would take. I could not perceive an escape. It felt as though I were precariously positioned on the precipice of a cliff. There was no possibility of retreat. The only direction remaining was forward. "I do not wish to cause you discomfort," he stated, his voice kind. There was a small hesitancy in his tone, yet an undeniable sincerity underpinned his words. "I just wanted to check on you." I could sense my pulse quickening and my heart hammering in my chest. I was not uncomfortable, at least not in the manner he presumed. It was a totally other sensation, a profound emotion that awakened within me whenever he was present. I was filled with fear. I recognized that if I allowed this to continue, there would be no possibility of reversal. However, I refrained from conveying this to him and instead proposed a faint smile, a superficial effort at reassuring. "I'm fine," I reiterated anyway. The remark suddenly seemed even more vacuous than previously. A prolonged silence ensued, and for an instant I anticipated he would speak. He could have inquired further, yet he merely nodded his gaze, resting on me for a little longer, before he turned and departed, leaving me solitary. With my reflections, I gradually closed the door behind him. My palm lingered on the knob, my heart beating. The silence returned, yet it felt different. The oppressive stillness was suffocating, yet his words continued to resonate in my head, laden with subtle accusation. Concealed behind them, "You are not fatigued, you are something different," and I could not dispel the sensation that I was positioned at the brink of an irreversible event, one that, despite my efforts to deny, it was already commencing. As the night unfolded, it felt too prolonged, burdened by the gravity of recent events. Words reverberated in my thoughts, however I did not fully comprehend them. I could still perceive the expression in his eyes, remained fixated on me, probing as though he possessed knowledge of something I could not conceal, whatever of my efforts. Unusual and disconcerting, yet I continued to contemplate it long after he departed from my room. His presence had lingered, transformed the cadence of my existence in an unforeseen manner. I ought to have succumbed to slumber, should have embraced the solace of the rhythm, lured me into a tranquil slumber, yet sleep evaded me as it frequently did of late. The bed beside me felt increasingly frigid than it had in years. It served as a harsh reminder of all that I perceived as absent, everything I had been yearning for. For an extended while my spouse conversely had scarcely communicated with me that evening. He was immersed in his own realm, preoccupied with his work and distracted by personal issues, leaving no space for anything else. I was uncertain whether he had observed the transformation in me, or if he merely lacked concern. Perhaps he was preoccupied. I became acutely aware that the concept rendered me feeling emptier and more isolated than I had ever experienced. It was not that he lacked affection for me, but rather that love had transformed into a commodity we both saw as commonplace. Prolonged exertion necessitated. I had convinced myself that I was well, that it was merely a transient phase of dissatisfaction. However, I was acutely aware that I was deceiving myself. The reality was significantly more intricate, and my body ached with the sort. of desire I had not had in an extended period, and it was not the type of desire that could be satiated with a handful of illicit kisses, or my endeavors at intimacy were insufficient. I yearned for a profound connection, a fervor that had long since extinguished. In my marriage, I had a profound hunger that seemed to consume me from within. The following morning I awoke. Awake before dawn, the burden of the previous night lingered. The home was still and tranquil, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen prompted me to dress swiftly, almost in a mechanical manner, as if navigating through I no longer wished to adhere to my routine. My hands trembled slightly as I donned my clothing, my fingers brushing across the fabric of the garment adhered to my skin, intensifying my self-consciousness. Conscious of the chasm separating me from the woman I once was, a woman brimming with confidence and desire. Fire now, I felt like a specter navigating the routines of a life that no longer suited me. I proceeded to As I poured myself a cup of coffee in the kitchen, I contemplated what the day may entail. Every other day, my husband is engrossed in his work while my thoughts drift to unwelcome destinations. Alter something unforeseen that would destabilize the cornerstone of my meticulously crafted existence while I sat while seated at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, my mind wandered back to my stepson. What did he mean by his remark's perception of me that prompted his gaze? I endeavored to persuade myself that it was merely transient. Initially, a fleeting interest, however, I instinctively saw its deeper significance. Her presence had ignited a latent aspect inside me that I could no longer suppress, something that had been entombed beneath years of obscurity. The complacency of a habit that never seeks improvement. I had consistently assured myself that I cherished my spouse and was satisfied with the life we had constructed together. In many respects, I still loved him, but love was insufficient. It had transformed into a term, a designation we affixed to our existence due to societal expectations. The fervor and connection I previously experienced have dissipated, and I am uncertain how to reclaim them. I continued to feign existence within this vacuous interaction, quickly rising, the chair skidding against the floor. As I pushed it back, the abrupt motion frightened me. Yet I could no longer remain stationary. I needed to escape. I sought to engage in any activity within the house that would divert my attention from the tumultuous thoughts spinning uncontrollably. I donned my coat and exited the frigid air, striking my face as I traversed the driveway. The neighborhood remained quiet. Residences illuminated by the soft glow of dawn compelled me to calm my mind and absorb the external world. Within the boundaries of my own home, I was uncertain of my destination and the purpose of my search, yet I wandered aimlessly, the cadence of my footfall attempting to escape the restlessness that seems to engulf me. Eventually, I found myself sitting on a bench in the park observing the world pass by. The atmosphere was tranquil, interrupted only by sporadic sounds. Birds soared above, prompting me to contemplate how many people shared my sentiment of being ensnared in lives they had not selected. Contemplating the existence of something superior that could restore their vitality, I shut my eyes. For a little period, I allowed the tranquility of the park to envelop me, and then, unexpectedly, I sensed a presence beside me. I opened my eyes to discover my stepson standing before me as if he had materialized unexpectedly. "Are you all right?" he inquired. His voice was soothing, his eyes probing mine. The question remained unchanged, yet this time it had an undeniable weight. I did not respond immediately. Instead, I scrutinized him intently, and for the first time comprehended how the proximity we had achieved and the significance he had started to hold for me in ways I had not entirely comprehended. I am uncertain if I articulated this. Ultimately, my voice trembled, yet remained sincere. I am uncertain about my next course of action. He took a seat beside me without hesitation. His presence was simultaneously comfortable and unnerving upon uttering a word. Uncertain of the destination, it felt unavoidable, as if all preceding events had culminated in this instant. Toward an issue we could no longer overlook, and for the first time in an extended period, I had a flicker of hope that perhaps an impending change would compel me to confront the truth I had been concealing. The subsequent days felt indistinct as I navigated the routine of daily existence, rising, attending work, and feigning normalcy. I aimed to remain the same individual I had always been, yet an inward transformation occurred. I could not cease contemplating him in that manner. He regarded me in a manner that suggested his presence permeated every aspect of my thoughts, an occurrence I had not solicited, neither had I been prepared for it. Nonetheless, a persistent thought was developing in the recesses of my mind each time I beheld my husband. His voice, however familiar, now resonated like an echo of something to which I could no longer relate. We continued to share the same bed and residence, however the distance between us had expanded, becoming increasingly evident. Each touch was felt more acutely. Mechanical, each kiss felt like an obligation. He had not really perceived the difference. If he had not mentioned it, he was preoccupied with his own life, consumed by works. In the usual cadence of his days, he appeared unaware of the subtle disintegration of the gradual deterioration of what was once a profound bond. And then there was him, my stepson, the simple. The notion of him accelerated my pulse and caused my heart to gallop in a manner that instilled fear within me. I had never regarded myself as someone who I would breach my partner's trust, yet the more I attempted to suppress my sentiments, the more persistent they grew. It felt as though I could not evade him. His presence had transformed into a perpetual reminder of my past. I denied attempting to evade him and to maintain distance, convincing myself that nothing had occurred. Altered to suggest it was merely a transient phase, although the reality was irrefutable each time he was present, each time our gazes intersected, and an undeniable intensity permeated the atmosphere, rendering it unignorable. It was a tacit understanding, an unspoken agreement between us, an understanding that neither dared to articulate, yet both could sense the strain between us intensified and became more tangible with each passing day. Nonetheless, despite my efforts to maintain distance, I discovered I sought him out devising rationales to be in proximity to him. It lacked logic, it lacked rationality, yet it was tangible. The pole exerted a magnetic force, and I found myself unable to liberate from it during each illicit instant. Seemed both a boon and a bane. I saw the peril of my actions, yet an irresistible exhilaration accompanied them. A thrill accompanied by secrecy, the illicit aspect of our interaction. One day as I sat in the kitchen at the table, my husband remains at work. The home is silent and vacant. I heard a gentle knock at the door and I was aware. Before I ever opened it, my heart raced as I approached the front door, the atmosphere dense with anticipation. In anticipation, he stood there, his face slightly flushed, as if he had been waiting outdoors for some time. He did not speak immediately. His stare was locked on me, searching as if anticipating my utterance of anything that would break the silence. He softly acknowledged the unresolved tension between us, stating, "I need to talk to you," his voice low and almost reluctant. I swallowed hard, experiencing a blend of terror and need churning in my stomach. I stepped aside, permitting him to enter despite A portion of me protested that this was an erroneous course of action, yet I was unable to halt it. I had no desire to cease it as he took a seat. Opposite me, we remained silent for a minute, the tension in the silence palpable with each passing second. The weight of our unexpressed words became burdensome. My head raced while my heart faltered. I felt a sensation in my breast. However, I was unable to articulate it. It was as though I had forgotten how to construct words and convey the turmoil within me subsided when he finally spoke, expressing that he cannot cease contemplating me. He spoke softly, his voice little above a whisper. The words lingered in the air, akin to a raw and vulnerable confession. I was immobilized. It was as though the earth ceased to rotate, the moment frozen in time. His words served as a catalyst that lit a conflagration. Within me resided a fire I had endeavored to conceal, but now there was no evading it. I am uncertain of what lies ahead. As the event unfolded, he had his gaze fixed on mine. Nonetheless, I could not disregard this sensation. I felt my breath. The yearning lingered just beneath the surface, triggered by his admission, yet I was unable to express it. Express it, but not yet, and only after recognizing the ramifications of our actions. I was uncertain about how to proceed. I sensed my body responding to him and his words, yet I could not bring myself to recognize it. Guilt began to, a familiar emotion began to infiltrate my consciousness, one I had been endeavoring to evade. What was I doing? How did we arrive at this point? I am unable to articulate my thoughts. My mind is in turmoil. Attempting to comprehend the situation was futile as there was no straightforward solution. The reality was that I was uncertain of the appropriate course of action. One part of me desired to flee and distance myself from him, yet another half was unable to do so. Denai sought to bridge the gap between us, yearning for his contact and the sensation of authenticity once more. He extended his hand then. His hand was cautious, as if uncertain whether I would withdraw, but I remained still. His fingers grazed mine, eliciting a response. An electric shock wave coursed through my body. It was delicate and smooth, yet it felt intense. All that I had yearned for the tactile connection was an inexplicable sensation, and in that moment he understood that whatever had commenced between us, whatever this was, could not be reversed. "I do not wish to cause you pain," he said. His voice, imbued with honesty, conveyed my uncertainty about how to halt this. "I do not desire it." To cease, I sensed my heart thumping in my chest, my breath accelerating and becoming more superficial. His words had sparked something within me. Within me was a hunger I had not had in years. The allure to succumb and accept our mutual feelings was palpable, nearly unbearable, yet the potential ramifications and damage were substantial, and still in the recesses of a faint voice suggested that perhaps I was already too far gone to halt as he remained seated there. With hands still lingering near mine, I recognized that the silence between us had transformed. It was no longer stifling. It was not the silence of avoidance or sorrow. It was the stillness of mutual understanding, a silence that conveyed meaning. Conflicts in its unique manner as I sat there divided between my apprehension and my yearning, I was confident that nothing would ever return to its previous state. The subsequent days felt like traversing a delicate precipice, the boundary between reality and an unnamed perilous entity that we both sensed. The touch persisted on my skin, an electric sensation that would not diminish regardless of my attempts to suppress it. The mind was in a perpetual turmoil of contradictory feelings, with dread contending against want and guilt intertwining with longing. There was an incessant desire for something greater. Each encounter with him diminished the distance between us, yet every separation felt profound. The stillness was more oppressive than ever. I was unable to confide in anyone, not even in myself. What transpired, and how could I elucidate it? This was not a transient occurrence. This was not merely a temporary slip of judgment. It was something fundamentally deeper. The fundamental foundation of my life was destabilizing, and I found myself unable to prevent its collapse. The world continued unabated, offering no respite for me to regain my composure or to resolve the turmoil within. I went through the motions feigning the persona I formerly embodied at work. I smiled, engaged in small talk, and fulfilled my obligations. Upon returning home, it seemed as though everything had changed. My spouse remained unchanged, still distant and preoccupied with his. I worked unaware of the turmoil simmering beneath the surface of our marriage, but I could no longer feign ignorance. I had transformed. I was no longer the same. Each night I would recline in bed. The proximity of his warm body juxtaposed with the internal chill I experienced rendered me unable to sleep. I was unable to silence my thoughts. They continually wandered to him and to the ephemeral electric moment we had shared. I inadvertently opened a door to an irresistible allure from which I could not disengage. I was uncertain about the nature of my attraction to him. Whether it was the attention, the care, or something totally different, I was convinced of one thing. Whatever it was significant. I had long desired something. The guilt was overwhelming, yet it did not deter me from pursuing him. The last time I encountered him, it felt as though I was compelled by an unseen power, one that I could not withstand. I would fabricate justifications, must be in proximity to him to experience that spark, that warmth that appeared to radiate from him. Each furtive glance, each fleeting touch was palpable. It served as a confirmation of my emotions. It was intoxicating. However, as days transitioned into weeks, the burden of the activities we engaged in enveloped me like a burdensome shroud, characterized by secrecy, deception, and an incessant apprehension of exposure. It began to erode my well-being. But despite everything, I was unable to cease. The reality was that I was unwilling to cease. I was uncertain of how to halt. One evening, while traversing the corridor, my thoughts were engulfed by, I perceived the indistinct sound of footsteps behind me. My heart raced, and I turned abruptly. I anticipated seeing him standing there, but instead it was my husband gazing at me with a perplexed expression. "Are you—" he inquired, his voice tinged with concern. I compelled a grin, however it seemed like a facade I could not maintain. "Indeed, I am well," I stated, my voice revealing my vulnerability, too soft, too distant. He did not pursue the matter further. He merely nodded and proceeded to return to his office. Yet an alteration in the atmosphere was palpable, a shift that I was unable to articulate, whether it was his gaze or my increasing realization of my own possessions that influenced me. I separated myself from him. Still, I could not dispel the sensation that he was aware, even in silence. There was something in his eyes that prompted me to question everything, making me ponder whether he could perceive the facade I had constructed. With meticulous care, I proceeded to the kitchen, anticipating that a cup of tea would soothe my anxiety. Nevertheless, upon opening as I retrieved the tea leaves from the cupboard, I heard another knock at the door, causing me to freeze. There was no need to ponder the identity. It was him, once more as inevitable as the rising sun, and my heart raced in my chest. A blend of anticipation and anxiety coursed through me as I stood still for a while, collecting my thoughts in an attempt to regain composure. My breath, there was no turning back now, not after all we had already experienced together. I approached the door, my actions slow and deliberate, as if each step was leading me closer to a precipice. I was uncertain about my readiness to fall. Upon opening the door, he stood there, his look inscrutable. Upon seeing me, his eyes softened, and I had a profound sensation deep within, reminiscent of a feeling I had consistently encountered. The last time I encountered him, there was an undeniable magnetism akin to that of an electric pole. The first moment I comprehended my reluctance to visit you, he uttered his voice scarcely above a whisper, yet laden with weight. With significance, I did not react promptly. The words were lodged in my throat and tangled with shame and need. That had grown exceedingly familiar, yet I felt no need to articulate anything as he advanced closer. His presence was powerful, and I did not withdraw without speaking. He extended his hand lightly, grazing my arm. It was not a mere touch. It was something more profound, something intimate that caused my breath to catch. For a little while we stood there, the burden of the world bearing down upon us, yet neither of us moved. We were both immobile. Trapped in an irreversible moment, his fingers grazed the hem of my sleeve. The touch was so subtle and fragile that it seemed to suspend time itself. Every inch of my skin appeared to react to him, to the electricity that existed between us, and in that instant I comprehended. There was no turning back whatever of my attempts to refute it. This was the course I had selected, the course we had both chosen. Having made a selection, the sole inquiry was the extent of our willingness to proceed. He advanced nearer. His lips only inches from my ear, he muttered, "I cannot remain distant from you." Words resembled a flame in a dimly lit room, starting a conflagration that engulfed me whole. Remained motionless, the gentle caress of his lips against my ear, still resonating in the atmosphere, eliciting a shudder up my spine. Every instinct urged me to withdraw and terminate this chaos before it escalated further, yet something profound, a part of me which I did not entirely comprehend or wish to recognize, drew me nearer to him, intensifying the tension between us. Crackled in the silence of the room, laden with unarticulated sentiments, burdened by what we had previously exchanged. For an extended moment we remained positioned inches apart, ensnared by the tension of the circumstance, his hand still gently resting. The contact on my arm transmitted waves of warmth throughout my body. It was not merely the physical sensation. Although unquestionably powerful, it was the connection and unspoken understanding that prevailed. That had been developing between us since that initial sight, that first moment of overwhelming attraction I experienced. I had been deceiving myself for an extended period, feigning ignorance of the unfolding events. I convinced myself that it was initially a transient emotion I believed it would dissipate. Yet with him standing so near, I recognized the reality of the situation. It was no longer something I could just abandon. Whatever had commenced between us had evolved into something beyond than mere. It was a transient obsession, an irresistible allure from which I could not extricate myself. I attempted to speak, yet the words eluded me. I was at a loss for what to articulate. What could I possibly convey? Halt seemed excessively feeble and inconsequential to impede the deluge of emotions that had already inundated my heart and thoughts. Excessively distant, ensnared between culpability and longing, juxtaposed with the existence I had constructed and the turmoil I was voluntarily entering. His hand glided from my arm to my waist, his touch both tender and firm, as if silently seeking permission, awaiting my response. Decide whether to remain in the comfort of my monotonous existence or to venture across the threshold into an utterly novel, perilous, thrilling, and ultimately irreparable experience. My breath was caught in the gravity of the decision weighed heavily upon me as I contemplated my husband and the life we had constructed together. The culmination of all my previous beliefs. Nevertheless, when I attempted to envision him in this moment, in this interstice, it felt remote, as though I inhabited a realm to which I no longer belonged, had been gradually disintegrating thread by thread until just the silent nothingness remained. An openness developed between us, and then there was my stepson, a man in the purest sense. Despite his age, there remained an aspect of him that exuded youthfulness and potential. His presence in my life once has an air of innocence, yet at some point it transformed into something very else. An unspoken comprehension, a mutual force that neither of us could refute. I continued to feign ignorance as I muttered the words which slipped out before I could restrain them. I had not intended to vocalize them. Now that they were exposed, I could not retract them. The confession lingered in the atmosphere, the veracity of it establishing itself between us. His fingers tightened around my waist, drawing me slightly closer. Experienced the heat of his body, the warmth that appeared to attract me despite my awareness of its inherent wrongness. He did not respond verbally. Instead, he regarded me with an intense gaze as if anticipating something. I must take the next step to demonstrate to him that this is genuine and that I am not being swept away by a whirlwind of emotions. It had been escalating uncontrollably. I could sense my heart rushing in my chest, the frantic rhythm reverberating in my ears. Every part of me implored me to cease to withdraw, to reclaim control, yet in the hush that extended between us, all I could perceive was the sound of my own breath, rapid and shallow. My body betrayed me, responding to his proximity. I desired his touch and the connection we shared regardless of its perilous nature, and the more I endeavored to, as I resisted the draw, intensified. Gradually, however hesitantly, I permitted myself to bridge the gap. My hands, trembling slightly, reached for him cautiously at first. Subsequently, with increased confidence, as want consumed me, my fingers located the hem of his shirt and I sensed its tautness. He remained silent and motionless, as if anticipating my decision, his muscles tensed beneath the fabric. To demonstrate my preparedness for whatever was ahead, and for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, I was prepared to liberate myself from the life I once knew. I am ready to succumb to the primal, unmistakable desire that has been intensifying. Within me, I kissed him. It was not soft nor kind, unlike the last occasion. Urgent. A fervent release of all that I had been concealing within my lips emerged. His intensity astonished us both, and for an instant I overlooked everything else, including the guilt. Consequences of the life I was departing. In that time, the only significance was the fervor between us, the intensity of his presence, the sensation of his lips, his hands grasping me, drawing me nearer. His touch was assertive and confident. There was no hesitancy, no further contemplation over its significance. We had transcended that phase and crossed a threshold. The decision was irrevocable, and when his hands traversed my back, I realized there was no turning back. As we shared the experience, the surrounding world appeared to diminish, and I recognized that I was no longer. The longer I reflect, the more I realize I am no longer the individual who existed only a few days prior. One who thrived in the security of routine and consistency had vanished, replaced by an individual overtaken by longing and trepidation, poised to advance. Entering a realm without of assurances, yet I remained indifferent in that instant. What mattered was the sensation of his presence against me, the fervor of the kiss, and the awareness that our actions were irreversible. For the first time in an extended period, I experienced a sense of vitality. The subsequent morning felt unreal, akin to emerging from a dream. Into a world that was excessively real and cruel, I awoke to the familiar sounds of the house, the buzz of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of traffic outside, the delicate whispering of leaves in the wind. Still, everything felt. It feels altered now, as if the very atmosphere surrounding me has been distorted by the decisions I made the previous night. My thoughts was clouded, and my body felt burdened by the aftermath of recent events as I lay there for an extended while, gazing at the ceiling, attempting to comprehend the situation, although the more I contemplated, the more the events of the night became indistinct, spiraling into a bewildering amalgamation of want, remorse, and an unnamed sensation. Initial rays of sunlight permeated the glass, spreading elongated shadows throughout the room. But it was the silence that enveloped me profoundly. It was a silence unlike any I had before encountered, devoid of the tranquility associated with serenity, isolation, yet the silence of something fractured, something irrevocable, the awareness that nothing could revert to its former state. The situation remained unchanged, regardless of my desires. My heart was racing in my chest. The sound was nearly loud in the silence, and I could sense the lingering effects of the kiss we had exchanged. The sensation of his contact had imprinted across my skin, putting an indelible mark on every aspect of my being. Remained profoundly cognizant of him despite his absence. The room, though vacant, was permeated by his lingering presence. In the recesses of my imagination, I contemplated my spouse, who remained asleep in the adjacent room. His unawareness shocked me with a pang of shame that penetrated further than anticipated. He had consistently exhibited kindness and patience towards me. I had first comprehended, yet at some point I had distanced myself from him, and now there was no possibility of return. I had committed betrayal. The prospect of that profoundly unsettled me, yet simultaneously evoked a peculiar sense of intrigue. With a sense of clarity, I realized I could not reverse my actions. The door creaked open, and footsteps approached, gentle yet methodical. I did not need to glance to ascertain the identity of the individual. The atmosphere between us had the unarticulated comprehension of the events that had occurred, had already deepened, enveloping him like a dense cloud as he stepped. He entered the room, his presence saturating the space with a subdued intensity. For a moment we stood there, neither of us speaking. The tension in the room was palpable, suspended in the air like an impending storm. He did not meet my gaze. Immediately his gaze appeared to be scanning the floor and walls as though he were attempting to discover something to articulate. I needed to disrupt the silence, yet I could no longer endure the pretense of inaction. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, while we feigned ignorance of a boundary that was irrevocably breached. As he raced and caught my stare, his dark eyes reflected a complex amalgamation of feelings that I could not precisely identify. Was it regret? Was it want? Or something more profound? I opened my mouth to articulate, yet no words emerged. What could I possibly convey? There was no explanation for our actions, nor anything that could alleviate the burden of our decision. I merely nodded in a subtle, perhaps undetectable move that appeared to acknowledge all that existed between us. He nodded silently, his countenance inscrutable, and for a little moment it seemed as though we were ensnared in an implicit accord, a coalition that neither of us had quite comprehended, yet both of us acknowledged. We had voluntarily entered. "I do not regret it," he stated abruptly, his voice subdued. The remark struck me with the force of a blow to the abdomen, not due to their surprise, but because they precisely reflected my own thoughts. I have consistently felt that I was not genuinely remorseful, at least not in the recesses of my mind. I saw it was erroneous and that every aspect of this was a blunder, but within my heart, in the profoundest part of my being, there existed an unmistakable affirmation that this was correct, that this was what I had been seeking. He positioned himself on the edge of the bed, was positioned such that his body was in proximity, allowing me to sense the heat emanating from him. I remained still. I was unable to withdraw. The pole. The bond between us was excessively powerful and magnetic. His presence had become a perpetual force, things I had no control over. For a minute we sat in quiet, neither of us uttering a word. The world outside persisted, oblivious to the tempest that had just erupted between us. However, inside, everything had transformed. The cornerstone of my existence, the life I had previously known, had been profoundly destabilized. There was no turning back. He eventually shattered the quiet once more, his voice scarcely above a whisper. "I do not desire this to be." It was a singular occurrence. The words lingered in the atmosphere, resembling a challenge, a promise, or a threat. I was uncertain which they represented, but they resonated in my thoughts, reverberating with all that I had endeavored to evade and all the self-deceptions I had maintained. Regarding my previous statement, I acknowledge that my voice quivered somewhat. That was the sole expression I could convey. The sole aspect that was comprehensible was that I was uncertain of what would follow, although I was aware that this was not concluded regardless of the circumstances. It was not a transient error, it marked a commencement, and that awareness, more than anything else, instilled terror in me. The silence extended once more. However, this time it was distinct. It did not feel vacuous, but rather replete with all that we had communicated non-verbally, and as I observed him seated nearby, I realized that there was no turning back. There is no reversing the actions that have already been initiated. I have made my decision, and now there is no recourse. The subsequent days were a relentless tempest of contradictory feelings. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling. I could not silence my tumultuous thoughts. I had transgressed a boundary, could never uncross, yet every part of me persistently advanced, irresistibly attracted to him in a manner that felt instinctive. Breathing evoked an unusual sense of inevitability, as though all that had been and all that existed was predetermined. What was imminent had been culminating in this moment. I was uncertain of my transformation, yet I recognized that I could no longer continue. I imagined myself as the individual I formerly was, at home. Nothing appeared significantly altered. The husband continued his customary routine, engrossed in his work, seemingly oblivious to the small change. Within me, or perhaps he was only too preoccupied to perceive it, nevertheless I sensed it. I discerned it in the manner I navigated through. The manner in which I engaged with him rendered every touch and word distant, almost alien. The passion had dissipated. In the silence we shared, only a burdensome, stifling weight remained from which I could not escape. My thoughts continually reverted to my stepson, the times we had, and the way he gazed at me with such the intensity of his touch triggered something within me that I had long suppressed. It was not merely physical. The connection was the mutual understanding established between us. He comprehended my needs and I understood his. We desired it. It was a perilous game we engaged in, yet none of us appeared inclined to cease. Each time I encountered him, it felt as though his magnetic presence dominated the room, compelling my attention and rendering thought difficult. Despite my attempts to maintain distance and repel him, my efforts were futile. Every gaze and fleeting touch only drew me closer. His hand on mine just appeared to draw me nearer. The tension between us was palpable, suspended in the air. Air hung heavy like a tempest about to unleash. My thoughts incessantly returned to my spouse and the life we had constructed together, a life that now experienced a profound emptiness. I had once loved him, or so I believed, although love was. It had long ceased to be sufficient. It was no longer about him, pertained to an entirely different matter. My emotions for him had diminished, supplanted by an unfamiliar sentiment. An experience both perilous and exhilarating, leading me to stand at the brink of a precipice, uncertain whether to advance or retreat. I sensed the burden of my choice bearing down on me, the awareness that whatever I chose would alter everything, yet I could not muster the strength to divert. The pull was too powerful. The need was overwhelming. I had succumbed once before, and it was undeniable now. There was no turning back. One afternoon, I found myself alone in the house my husband occupied with one of his numerous business engagements. The solitude was stifling. The house seemed excessively spacious for a solitary occupant. I mindlessly traversed the rooms. Not fully aware of my objective, it was only upon entering the living room that I observed him standing by the window. With his back turned to me, he was oblivious to my approach, and for a few period I simply observed him. He had changed. The youngster I once knew, now transformed, has been supplanted by a man exuding confidence and assurance imbued with an intensity. Every movement I had previously observed was now unmistakably evident. He was no longer merely my stepson. He had evolved into something more, evoking both terror and exhilaration within me. I took a step forward. My heart raced as I drew nearer, and for a brief moment I anticipated that he would turn to confront me, but he remained stationary. The tension between us intensified with each passing second, and I was unable to utter a word. No words remained. All the emotions I had repressed burst forth, and I experienced an intense, profound want to bridge the gap between us, to ultimately succumb to the burgeoning temptation. At last, he articulated his thoughts. His voice was quiet and seemingly hesitant as he said, "Do you know what this is?" The gravity of his words caused my heart to skip a beat. I was unable to respond to what we have both been experiencing. There was nothing to convey. His words had conveyed everything. He turned to face me, and for a time we simply stood there, gazing at each other. His gaze was intense, searching mine for something I was uncertain I could provide, and abruptly, without warning, he diminished the space separating us, his hand extending to delicately tuck my hair behind my ear. The touch was gentle, yet it contained an additional element that caused my breath to falter. The link was indisputable, and I realized at that instant that there was no escape. I had already transgressed the boundary, and there was no turning back. His hand descended to my waist, drawing me nearer, and I found myself unable to resist as my body reacted to him instinctively. That I could not elucidate, as if it had perpetually possessed the knowledge of what to do. We were now moving in flawless synchrony, our bodies drawn together. Bound by an imperceptible force beyond our control, I shut my eyes to the surrounding environment. Like his lips grazed mine, the kiss began softly timid, like if we were both anticipating. The other to initiate action, however, gradually, the passion escalated with each fleeting moment. My hands traversed to his chest, encountering the firm musculature beneath his shirt, prompting me to draw him closer. As I drew nearer, it felt as though I could not satiate my want for him. The kiss encompassed all that I had been yearning for, was feral and unrestrained, brimming with want and yearning, and at that instant I disregarded all else, including the repercussions. Guilt consumed me as I departed from my previous existence. All that mattered was the fervor between us, the blaze that had started the minute our paths crossed. Our gazes intertwined, and as I surrendered to the kiss, I instinctively recognized that this was merely the inception. There was no possibility of retreat. The subsequent days unfolded in a fog, a swirl of emotions that I struggled to comprehend, as if I had transcended reality into a new reality where the distinctions between right and wrong had become obscured, and all I could do was endure, and endeavored to maneuver through the tempest I had instigated. Each gaze and each caress felt intensified, as if time had decelerated. Everything familiar was eluding my grasp, and my thoughts became increasingly muddled. I was engulfed in thoughts of him and us, as if traversing life in a haze divorced from reality. The world surrounding me, my husband, unaware of the transformations within me, continued with his routine, engrossed in his work. The distance between us increased with each passing day, yet I was unable to address it. There was something novel. Subsequently, an event overshadowed all else, compelling me to maintain my composure and persist in my existence. It seemed as though nothing had altered. Nonetheless, it was inescapable that each time I encountered my stepson, I sensed that the electric pull was not solely physical, it was also emotional, reflecting the manner in which he gazed at me as if he comprehended me in a manner no one else could. It was seductive and addictive, I discovered. I yearned for the moments when he was present, when we could share that unarticulated bond, that fleeting touch, that glance. It conveyed all without uttering a word. I recognized my diminishing self, yet I was unable to quell the want for proximity to his touch was overwhelming, having taken root deep within me, and despite my efforts to suppress it, it persisted. It would not dissipate. The more I attempted to resist, the more potent it got, as though I was submerged, unable to find my way out. One evening following supper, my husband retired early, as was his custom, leaving me alone. In the living room, my thoughts were tumultuous and my body was agitated with a yearning for something greater. The home was also silent. It was silent, and I felt as though the walls were constricting around me. I needed to exit to inhale and evade the prevailing tension. As I built up my resolve, I donned my coat and exited the door, the frigid air striking me like a jolt to the system. The neighborhood was dimly tranquil, amplifying the tempest within me. I strolled without a destination. My thoughts were tumultuous with all that had transpired, everything I had been attempting to reject. Could not evade it regardless of the distance I traversed, or the effort I exerted to suppress it. And then, as if destiny had intervened, I resolved to propel myself farther into this tumultuous situation. I observed him standing beside the park hardly a few blocks away. As he faced away from me, I recognized him before seeing his visage. My heart skipped a beat. At that moment I hesitated, questioning my purpose and presence, but before I could, I answered my own questions. He turned and our eyes met. Words were unnecessary. The tension, the longing, the unarticulated understanding between us all lingered in the air, palpable and dense. Undeniably, he advanced toward me, his gaze fixed on mine, and I was certain that we were both ensnared and unable to escape. He remained silent, although his presence conveyed a peculiar amalgamation of terror and thrill, as if this moment represented both the apex of all experiences and the inception of something even greater. It was perilous. I was unaware of our destination or purpose, yet in that moment it was inconsequential. The significant factor was the undeniable connection between us, compelling me to bridge the gap. As we entered his embrace, I felt the warmth of his body against mine. My heart raced and my breath quickened. Superficial, yet I was unable to desist. I lacked the desire to do so and was indifferent to the repercussions of my existence. Abandoning all of significance, I was enveloped in this instant, this connection, this overwhelming sensation as his lips touched mine. My surroundings dissipated. It was an unparalleled kiss, imbued with need, desire, and all that we encompassed. I had been restraining myself, but the kiss intensified, and I found myself succumbing, unable to halt or withdraw, completely immersed. My response to him was ignited by the warmth of his body and the fervor of his touch. This transcended mere physicality. An experience profound, transcending all prior knowledge, when we ultimately disengaged. Breathless, we did not articulate, there were no words required, our emotions sufficed, right there in the space between us as our bodies remained in close proximity as if we could not endure separation. Art, I no longer wished to conceal myself. He murmured, his voice hoarse and his breath warm against my skin, and for the first time, I did not wish to conceal or reject the burgeoning connection between us, whatever of its nature. Was authentic, and I could no longer feign otherwise. As we stood in the park, the surroundings enveloped in silence. Nonetheless, I saw that the journey ahead was fraught with uncertainty, peril, and repercussions that I had yet to completely comprehend. I comprehended, however, I was aware that I had transgressed a boundary and there was no return. This was our current reality. No matter how much I resisted, I could not evade the reality that I had made this choice, and now we both must endure the consequences. Accompanied by the repercussions,